Teachers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing you've heard a student say? Part 2. Story 1. A student once told me he was going to burn his house down. We talked about how that would ruin his house and how he could possibly hurt his mom and dad or himself. His reply was, I'd make sure my mom was dead before I burnt it down. This kid is 8. Edit. Thanks for all the upvotes. I work as a special education teacher, specifically with students who are emotionally disturbed or have other disorders that impact their behavior. This isn't even the most ducked up thing I've heard, just one of the most memorable. Also, for those of you wondering about the possibility of abuse, I truly do not believe he is being abused. He has been my student for several years, and it is not uncommon for him to make disturbing statements. In fact, if I had $1 for every time he told me he was going to poison or stab someone, I would have almost enough money to fully fund my classroom. Reply. Makes you wonder if anything was going on in the home, or if the kid just had a violent streak. Story 2. I have a student who is constantly accusing the adults in the room of hurting him and insulting him and swearing at him. And he isn't joking. He fully believes these things are happening, despite none of these things happening. And if you tell him that no one is hurting him or swearing at him, he will glare at them with absolute vitriol and tell, yes you did, you pushed me and said the F word. There is no convincing him otherwise. This student is 4 years old. Edit. Okay, I did not expect this to blow up this much, and I'm not able to respond to everyone. I'll answer the most common questions here. Schizophrenia? Could be. We don't think it is, but we aren't qualified to make a diagnosis, and nothing is off the table. Has he gotten help? As if right now, no. That's what we're working on. It's also difficult because the family has no transportation and specialists aren't entering schools due to COVID. An appointment was made that they missed, but they asked to reschedule. So that's where we are now. Delusions? Hallucinations? We don't know. All we really know is how he acts when overwhelmed and the very likely causes of these reactions. Reply 1. I work with a high school student who does this. He has PTSD and was sexually abused as a child. He makes up lies about things teachers do to him that literally don't happen. Reply 2. Does he understand what he's doing? My student doesn't. Original poster. I can't tell. He tends to lie a lot, so at first we thought he was lying and knew it, but a lot of situations have come up where it seems as though he genuinely believes his own lies. Story 3. He, 6th grade, came to school with a bruised face and told me he got pistol whipped and his dad got murdered the week before. This kiddo cried in my arms. I let him sit in my class with his head down all day. He missed school for a bit a couple weeks later, and I was worried sick. His girlfriend told me that he was in juvie for weed. It kept happening, but substances got harder. I think about that baby all the time. By 7th grade, he was too hard to open up to me, and we didn't keep in touch. I think about him and his girlfriend, another favorite student, constantly. Reply 1. They really throwing 6th graders in juvie for ducking weed? That's some shit if I've ever heard it. Especially if he was dealing with the death of a parent. Man was just trying to feel better, and then he was punished for it. Duck that shit. He needs therapy. Reply 2. You know what will help these kids get better adjusted? Institutionalization. A nightmare. Story 4. I was talking to 2nd graders about body parts. I explained that joints are what make your limbs move. 3 little girls standing together. Girl 1. Do you know where your joints are? Girl 2. I don't smoke. Girl 1. Confused AF. Girl 3. Well, there's different kinds of joints. Story 5. If this school allowed violence, there'd be a lot of body bags. Coming from the silent, creepy kid who fit every description of your typical school shooter. The rest of the semester with him was fun. Story 6. Trying to convince a 17-year-old student that drugs are not the way to go and that he has a full life ahead of him when he says, doesn't matter, I'm going to be dead or in jail by the time I'm 25. He had been told he was nothing his whole life and he absolutely believed it. Spent up until he graduated trying to prove him wrong. Reply. I was this kid. I started smoking pot at 10 and had graduated to heroin by 14. My entire adolescence I was told I was worthless, so I believed it and acted accordingly. At 13, my vice principal told me I would never amount to shit, so I should quit school altogether and stop wasting everyone's time. To be fair, I had just called her a cunt for suspending me over skipping classes. I did stop. Never graduated, which is my biggest regret. I'm now 20 years sober and work as a paramedic with a government pension. Story 7. A kid missed his bus home and had an absolute meltdown. Eventually it came out that his dad told him that if he missed the bus again, he'd hold his head under water even longer this time. Edit to address some of the comments that came up a lot. Yes, the authorities were called. I don't know what exactly happened with the student, but I do know he was back in school soon after. I don't know how he's doing today. When he reached middle school, he transferred to another school district. As a school employee, I am a mandated reporter. This happened before the law changed to include new guidelines. Today, I would be required to immediately call it into the state hotline and then report it to my principal. At the time, the procedure for my role, IT was not a teacher, was to notify either the school nurse or principal of suspected abuse. Because the principal was on the scene, I didn't need to report it. The guidance counselor, social worker, and school resource office were all called in, and the police were on the scene by the time I left work a little bit later. If I wasn't sure whether they'd contacted the authorities, I absolutely would have reported it. But I trusted my principal. She was a fierce advocate for every student, especially the ones in tough situations. If you want a happy ending on this story, unfortunately, I can't tie it up with a nice ribbon. I don't know how he's doing today. Better, I hope. What I do know is that I worked at a school with staff who care about their students and fight hard to get kids the help they need. They're able to help a lot of kids, but sometimes the system fails. It's a sad fact of life. But to end it on a positive note, I came from an abusive household myself. Not nearly as severe as this situation, thankfully, but abuse was present. It's possible for children of abuse to break the cycle and go on to lead happy and fulfilling lives despite the hand they were dealt. If you came from a rough background, you can still get help as an adult. You can't change the past, but you can heal, and you can help others get the help they need too. Reply 1. Please tell me how you know the kid's alive somewhere. Reply 2. Oh no, was anything done to help the kid? Original poster. He was already in a program for kids who needed extra emotional support. The police were there by the time I left for the day, and I'm not sure what ended up happening. I work in IT, so I wasn't directly involved, but it happened right outside my office, so I could hear everything. That was one of those days that I drove home with no music or podcasts playing, just silence and staring straight ahead the entire drive home. Story 8. I had a senior student describe to a friend in class how she was going to duck her boyfriend that night. The boyfriend is also a student at school. It got disturbing when she asked for my opinion. Reply. In this situation, a female teacher would be creeped out. A male teacher would be creeped the duck out. Story 9. I had a student, under 10, tell me he wanted to cut my head off and watch me bleed. I had the audacity to tell him that he needed to put his crayons up before he could get his Play-Doh out. Story 10. Not from a student, and not from me, but from a teacher friend. Parent. Oh, you can just hit her. I hit her all the time. It's fine. Just hit her. Story 11. Had an international college student write a paper about his family, and a big part of it was talking about how he was jealous of his cousin's dog, so he drowned it in the ocean in front of said cousin. When I asked him why, he said he wanted the dog, and if it wasn't his, it didn't deserve to live. I gave the paper to my bosses, and he ultimately got deported for a bunch of violations and red flags. Runners-up are a girl explaining she decided to go to college after her best friend was murdered in front of her during a gang turf war, and another girl who tried to explain to the class why torture porn movies like Megan is Missing are the best movies ever. Both of these two were in the same remedial class. Reply 1. Man, we had a public speaking class with the best student present at the end of the year, and his story was about coming to college after his brother was killed in gang shit. Pretty sobering for freshman year me, first semester in. Story 12. Second grade teacher here. A student recently told me his parents have a vibrating bed. I had to hold back laughing. Reply 1. I have so many questions. Is the top of the bed heart-shaped? Do his parents speak a language similar to, but also completely unlike English? Do they have green diamonds floating above their heads? Reply 2. Do they refer to sex as woohoo? Story 13. I had a student who was sweet and innocent to adults. However, when alone with other kids, he would curse at them and manipulate them to do his bidding. When the other students would complain, the student would act innocent and deflect anything that was said to him. I couldn't prove anything when I expressed my concerns to Mom. Mom played the victim. One day, however, I introduced Flipgrid, a video recording service for assignments, to which the student went on video and started spewing racial slurs to another student. On video, this boy exposed himself. I sent the video to our principal. Mom gets called in to have a conference. Mom plays the victim again about his behavior. The student gets transferred shortly after. Story 14. Can I join in on this, although my situation is a little flipped? I was the student, and the teacher, technically superintendent, said something disturbing, more meaningful to me, and I'll never forget it and him. Edit. You know, my brother told me that too, and I cried a lot. I used to go to a very small school, and in high school, my 9th grade year, we had an art teacher, Mr. Pena. We got along well with a lot of students. Had his own art club where I would go after school sometimes. He taught me a lot about drawing and other media. His brother was also the superintendent, a different Mr. Pena. So, Art Mr. Pena quit my 10th grade year, and then in the middle of my 11th grade year, he unfortunately unalived himself. It left everyone shook. The same 11th grade year, we had a new physics teacher who came in, and he was a cool person to talk to, but we all hated how he taught because he just told us to read the book and never really helped us understand anything, then would get mad at us for not getting it. During this same time, my abusive grandfather just had back surgery and was becoming toxic toward literally everyone because he was bored and depressed. So one day, I had enough of my physics teacher's shit, and I was just rage holding together because I was so tired of not understanding the lessons because I was smart. And I went to my superintendent after he finished teaching math, small school, and he pulled me aside and asked what was wrong. After I vented about everything my physics teacher had done, I felt like a wall come down, but more behind it. So I was holding back tears and telling him that I didn't look like it, but I was honestly fine. And what he said next I'll remember forever. He looked me in my eyes and said, "You know, my brother told me that too." And I just lost it. He listened to me vent and let me skip my next class. He took me to the library and gave me a snack from the cafeteria, and when it was physics, he came and sat in the class and watched what the teacher did. I hope he's doing well. I went to theater with his daughter my last year of high school. He saw me graduate too. Story 15. My mom's a teacher, and she says there was a student that used to make these little paper drug packets, and he didn't even know what they were. She says that the mother was a drug dealer and would make him make them all day long if he wasn't in school. Safe to say the police were involved after certain things happened, like her never turning up to the school to collect him one night and other stuff. Pretty weird how a child was making literal drug packets and had no idea. He was just proud of them because that was the only thing he was taught how to do at home. Story 16. This one student once told me, unprompted, "I like red cars because that's the color of car my mom used when she left us to do drugs." Reply 1. What do you even say to that? Reply 2. That's rough, buddy. Story 17. I had a 6th grader that I was always razzing for never having his Chromebook charged. I was really a softie that always enabled him, and basically any other neglectful student, to charge it. Otherwise they couldn't do work. One day he said, "Mr. X, you'll be proud. My mom had to get up at 4 a.m. to bail Dad out of jail and took us with her, so I remembered to charge my Chromebook before school." I wasn't disturbed exactly, but was grateful that I hadn't been too hard on him. I was definitely saddened, though. Story 18. We saw our neighbor die last night. Completely deadpan. Me. Oh my goodness, what happened? Are you okay? Them. He was racing his lawnmower and it dragged him to death. It went really fast. Me. Are you okay? Would you like to talk to the counselor? Them. Nah, we're fine. We've seen it before. Them. Twin 7th grade boys in the Ozarks of the southern Midwest, USA. Story 19. During a class field trip, a girl in class casually mentioned before everybody that the road we were driving down was the same one she tried to unalive herself on the year before because she was bullied so badly. She said she'd been driving and floored it, hoping to hit a tree, only to change her mind because she didn't want to hurt her family. It just came out of nowhere, and from the girl who was generally considered incredibly popular, kind, and well-liked. Story 20. A student in juvie once told me one of the reasons he kept coming back was, "It's the only place I had treated like a human being." That shit hit me hard. Story 21. One year I was teaching K at a Title I school, and one of my students came to school with a Band-Aid on her forehead. I asked her what happened, and she told me her dad had thrown a book at her head and made her bleed. I called CPS and was later told the school counselor that she was removed from the home because Dad was physically and sexually abusing her. Story 22. I heard a student say to another teacher who was pregnant at the time, "I hope your baby dies." And the really sad part, she had a miscarriage a few weeks later. It was horrifying. Reply 1. When I was in school, one of my classmates said this to the pregnant substitute during gym class. She broke down crying and walked off. Later, security came and took the kid to the office, and the rest of the class merged with the next grade up being taught by a different teacher. I don't think I ever saw the sub after that. Rules for subs were you can have fun and be difficult, but no deep personal digs like that. That will probably echo in her head for a while. Reply. As a substitute teacher for 15 years, it's pretty clear when the kids are attempting to go for the throat or just want to know if you care. When they went for the throat, I did all the paperwork necessary to protect myself. The worst was very public, very blatant sexual harassment. I had to eject them and call my union rep to make sure everything was documented correctly. When they were clearly just trying to figure out if I cared about them by having and enforcing a boundary, that was clear as well, and we all got along famously. Story 23. I had a girl tell me her father had R-worded her from the age of 3 to 7. She started out difficult, and by the time she graduated, we had formed a great bond. Story 24. A 4-year-old came in with a Barbie whose hair had been cut off. I asked what happened. She has cancer. I assumed there was a family member or friend, and this was a lesson she was processing. Story 25. I had 2 students approach me after school. I was outside monitoring the kids leaving the building to walk home, and these 2 boys walked up and started telling me how cute I was as a baby. Being middle schoolers, I didn't take it super seriously at first, but asked what they were talking about. One of them showed me one of my baby pictures on his phone and proceeded to tell me my address and, at the time, fiancé's name. The assistant principal was nearby, so I called him over and had them repeat what they'd said. The information they had was not readily available with a quick Google search, and I still don't know how they got it. One of the boys' father was a known higher-up in a local gang, so I was totally freaked out. The school took the stance of kids will be curious and it isn't a big deal. I talked to the police officer posted at the school, and he told me I was well within my rights to press charges. But within 30 minutes of the conversation, the assistant superintendent was at my classroom dorm informing me of how bad it would look on my evaluation and for potential future jobs if I pursued anything. I no longer work there, but I have never been more disturbed or scared. Story 26. Not a teacher, but my sister had a student punch her stomach when she was pregnant and said, "I'm gonna kill your baby." She works with special needs children. Story 27. Had a 6-year-old scream, "I'm gonna cook you up and eat you," to the daycare director. He had a lot more outbursts like that, where he would go into specific details of how he would harm you. He was also obsessed with axes and knives and would draw them constantly. His parents swear they didn't let him watch anything violent and had no idea where he was learning any of this. He was diagnosed as on the autism spectrum, and the parents were getting him therapy, and honestly seemed like they were trying to do their best. Story 28. I taught at a girls' school overseas. We had girls from China, the Philippines, India, Nepal, Pakistan. One day, I walked into my English class, and I noticed one girl was missing. I asked if she was absent. Her fellow Pakistani friends had a plain look and said her dad came to get her. It was not uncommon for these kids to have a grandparent or relative pass away in the home country, and they may be gone for a month. Anyways, after class I was down at the admin office, and a secretary told me she would no longer be in my class. The vice principal was close by. She had an odd look on her face. I figured family was moving back to Pakistan. Later in the day, I had the same class again for a substitution. I asked about X and if her family moved back home. One of the girls told me she's getting married. My eyes got big and I had to remain professional. I wanted to shout, she's only barely 13, but I couldn't. I just said, oh, we'll miss her. She's a good kid. And I left it at that. You could see the look in the eyes of the Pakistani, Indian, and even Nepalese girls. Like they were used to this happening even though they now lived in a very modern Chinese city, and somewhere born were there. After lunch at the admin office again, I spoke to the vice principal. She told me the school couldn't do anything. There was no legal way to stop the father removing the daughter from the school. To my American eyes, that's a messed up thing, and I noticed how the older girls acted different. The Chinese, Indian, and Filipino girls were getting more focused on studies after secondary school, and public exams were important. But the Pakistani and Nepalese girls were less interested. Over time, I learned their lives were going to be dictated to them. Not all of them, but most of them. It was hard to see. Reply: oh, that breaks my heart. As a Westerner, I forget how much of a struggle equality is for women in so many countries still. I don't even know how to process that as a reality. Story 29. Was an aide in a guidance office. The most disturbing was a kid we'll call Tyler. He had severe social adjustment issues and tended to say things that creeped people out. One day, he comes in wanting to talk to a counselor. I was playing receptionist that day and told him I'd let them know and asked what was up. He very blankly says, I tried to walk out into traffic yesterday. This was obviously alarming, so I brought him straight to one of their offices. He repeats what he told me, and this ducking bitch counselor says, you need to come back later. I'm working on college admission stuff for other students. He just kind of sighed and left. Reply 1. The counselor's comment is more disturbing than the kid's. Reply 2. It's really not that surprising from what I've experienced and from the friends I have now that are in teaching. We need 2 separate positions at schools: counselors for scheduling classes and emotional counselors. Reply 3. It honestly doesn't make sense to me that those 2 things get grouped together. They don't seem very compatible in a job description. Reply 4. Not to mention, they also fill out paperwork for students. I had a guidance counselor, guidance in quotes because she hardly gave any, who tried to convince me not to apply to one of my universities because it was more paperwork for her. I was furious and refused. Story 30. Feels a little light compared to some in here, but what's the point of empathy? Was one that made me stop in my tracks. This is the same student, HS, who said that the only reason to be nice to someone is because you want something from them. Story 31. I had a student text me a picture from her sister's funeral. Her 14-year-old sister had been murdered by a 15-year-old boy. She, understandably so, said that she wanted that F-word to pay for what he did. The picture was of the casket with a memorial slideshow in the background. Story 32. The fact that this entire page is filled with responses from children who have been through trauma because of shitty parents speaks for itself how much of an unstable life at home affects who you are at school. Story 33. When I was student teaching elementary art, I was on crutches from a recent knee surgery. We were doing clay, and I was staying close to a particularly violent kid. They were using rolling pins to roll out slabs, and this kid was hitting other kids. I kept shielding the kids, trying to get the thing out of his hand, when he finally tried to throw it. Pretty badass, honestly. I snatched it out of midair and was trying to put distance between us and scolding the kid. Kid turns to me and yells, "Bitch, I'll break your other leg," and kicks me in my bad leg. Kid was 7 years old. Edit. To those saying you drop kick the kid, I get you, but in reality, it's not the kid's fault. It's his world that failed him. Parents, family, society. Sadly, the kid will most likely become a statistic. Young African American males are often seen as an unjustifiable threat, but when you throw years of learned confrontation and violence into the mix, they never stand a chance. It's hard to help kids who you only see at school, or in my case, only see once a week. It's a sad situation that's got to get fixed at the systemic level. Vote for people who care about people. To those concerned about my leg, my kid only kicked it half-heartedly. He knew he ducked up, threatened, and attacking an adult. I think he was more surprised I didn't beat the shit out of him for saying that. Story 34. Sorry, mister. I'm going to be out while I go to rehab. Obviously, you hear about students using drugs and all that, but it disturbed me that it got to the point of abuse. Story 35. Had a young girl, grade 5, that asked if she could come home with me for Christmas because she didn't want to be at home for the break. We knew her home life was rough because parents were in a gang. I tried my best to assure her that everything would be okay and that we loved her. I also tried to add that her family loved her in their own way too. She replied, "If they love me, why do they hit me?" Thankfully, we got her removed from the situation not long after, and every Christmas I think of her and hope she is doing all right. I shudder to think what would have happened to her if she had not been removed, as the stories about what was really happening were horrific. Story 36. Many things. A female 8th grader told me her uncle made her give him massages. A 6th grade boy was sad and told me I reminded him of his mom, who had overdosed when he was 5. A 7th grade girl told me she was considering unaliving herself and was dealing with the trauma from being molested when she was 5. A girl was cutting herself in the school bathroom and was trying to unalive herself. A 6th grade boy said his mom and dad gave him up because they were both in and out of jail for drugs and he was adopted by his grandmother. A grandparent of a student told me he had custody of his grandson because the boy's biological father had left home for drugs. The boy's father OD'd and was discovered on the front porch. Strangely, thankfully, when I hear these stories now, they don't affect me nearly as much as when I started teaching. Story 37. 2 come to mind. A student threatened to stab me. They found a knife on him later, and he was expelled. Then I had a student who had an argument with a different group during work time and threatened to shoot them, saying, "I'm going to duck and kill you tomorrow." Not to mention the almost yearly gun and bomb threats, especially the really detailed ones that drastically affect attendance. It's shit like that which makes me roll my eyes when people say, "You teachers have it so easy." Story 38. Not a teacher, but I heard a kid say, if I had a family, I would eat them too. We were discussing cannibalism from a non-ethnocentric viewpoint, and he was serious. Story 39. My parent is a teacher. Last week, a student told her that his puppy died. Another student overheard and went over to his house and dug up the dead puppy. These are 8-year-olds. Story 40. I'm not gonna lie, I stabbed a bitch. Okay, so I started my career in Title I school, poor, inner city in Texas. I taught senior economics, government. One of my seniors whom I had a really good relationship with started missing a lot, to the point that her graduation was about to be out of my hands. Enough absences and it's an auto-fail. I finally see her. The conversation below is as verbatim as I remember. Teacher, where the hell have you been? Student, oh, there's some stuff going on. T, P, you need to graduate. You need to be here. If I don't know what's up, I can't help, and you can't graduate. S, well, my BF's baby mama keeps driving around after lunch looking for me. T, why, and what are you worried about? Q talking in circles a bit. S, well, I'm worried because they did a drive-by. And what's worse, my dad shot back, legalish in Texas, but he's a felon, so when the police came, he got arrested for having a gun. T, why did they shoot at your house? What is going on? There's more to this, with some more prodding. S, well, I'm not gonna lie, I stabbed a bitch. T, huh, and cue the exasperated 22-year-old teacher look. Note, I was not prepared in any way from my golden childhood or private university education for this, at all. To this point, this was movie shit to me. S, Mister, it was a little knife, shows on fingers about a 2-inch blade, and she was going to hit me with a bottle. She was talking shit. Cue me problem solving and trying to focus on graduation as we were like 2 months away. We solved it with giving our awesome, he was actually great to our kids and community, school resource officer the heads up, with the car and kids looking for her. They were from another school in a city 2 miles from ours. Weirdly, they got pulled over every single day and were getting truancy tickets every day. My kiddo came to class and graduated. Story 41. I work with at-risk youth. My students are amazing people 99% of the time. Circumstances can really duck a life. One of my best students was in class on court order. My class or juve to prison. This smart, inquisitive, respectful, creative young 16-year-old guy had robbed a younger 11-year-old kid at gunpoint from the back of a bicycle because his friend wanted the money. This kid had a gift for science, so I was able to help him graduate with a deep interest in astronomy, but goddamn if I didn't have to sit down after that shit for a while and think about how awful his life would have been had it not been for a really, really ducking, lenient judge and his friend, also at risk, also there by court order for dealing opiates at the high school, asking on a whim about aliens one day in class. Godspeed, young man. I'm always rooting for you. Story 42. I was shot 5 times as I ran away from my mother in the snow. From a narrative essay written by a freshman in my English composition class about 6 years ago. Story 43. I'm collecting trophies. Grade 10 student in the middle of a frog dissection. Story 44. I had a student who was incredibly bright, loved history, and loved to read about all kinds of things. He was absent for a week. When he came back, I was helping get him caught up and asked him what was up. He told me our washer was broken. He couldn't clean his uniform. His parents couldn't get it fixed right away and couldn't afford a laundromat, so he just didn't come to school for a week. Ducked up, if you ask me. Story 45. Not a student, but I'm a trainer with a bank, and a learner, my trainee, told me once, I R-word a girl with another friend, but I don't know if it was R-word because she probably enjoyed it. I was shocked and didn't know what to do. I freaked out. I thanked him for sharing and being honest and reported this to HR. Story 46. While student teaching, I had a girl who kept falling asleep in class, and so I talked with her after to see what was going on. Sleeping in class can be a huge red flag. I normally let them sleep for a bit if other kids don't notice. She eventually told me that her mom's boyfriend would R-word her or her sisters while they slept, so the older girls took turns sleeping and blocking the door to keep him away. It was so horribly ducked up. Mom knew and did nothing. DHS was called several times, but when I knew them, nothing happened. I always wonder what happened to them. To this day, I feel ill thinking about it and how little I could do to help. Story 47. I was student teaching, so I was not actually a direct part of the proceedings. My mentor teacher handled the primary incident. Amy Mentor had to call child services because of a concerning comment one of our little girls made regarding her living situation. At the time, she was living with Mom, Grandma, and a little brother. Mom was somewhat recently back in the picture after some issue. Possibly she was in jail during the previous school year. Grandma had custody of the children. I had met the mother at a support services meeting during the beginning of my placement, and things seemed typical then. Well, they ended up in family court, either directly resulting from that call my mentor made or not, I don't know. The next day, the little girl was in school. I overheard her telling one of her deskmates that, Mommy said it's my fault she can't stay with us no more. I don't know what the circumstances were, and I didn't catch the first half of that girl's story. But damn, it broke my heart to think that her mother must have had her visitations taken away, and instead of owning up to whatever her own problems were, she told her 7-year-old daughter that she was the cause of their troubles. Story 48. Did, not said. An 8-year-old, male, student tried to kiss me on the mouth with tongue. I told the school psychologist who talked to the kid, said he loved me, and that's what people do who love each other. That's kinda cute. But with more digging, the school psychologist found out the kid was watching porn with his dad regularly. Story 49. I had a student who was incredibly bright, loved history, and loved to read about all kinds of things. He was absent for a week. When he came back, I was helping get him caught up and asked him what was up. He told me our washer was broken. He couldn't get his uniform, his parents couldn't get it fixed right away, and couldn't afford a laundromat, so he just didn't come to school for a week. Ducked up, if you ask me.